My wife and I have been together for 16 years. We were high school sweethearts, and she was the only woman that I had ever been with. We started dating our sophomore year of high school, and we had hardly been apart for more than a week since then. I got a job at my father's company right out of college, and we have been working to build up our life ever since. We have 3 children together, a lovely home, a vacation house, and just about everything else you could want. My wife and I got along very well. I've always thought she was perhaps the funniest person I've ever met. We got a kick out of each other, and I thought that the heart of our marriage was the relationship we had as friends. Our families liked each other as well, which was something we both thought was important before we got together. The only issue in all of this was that my wife's best friend didn't always like me. She had been close with her friend, let's call her Kim, her entire life. It was almost like they had one brain at times. When my wife and I first started dating in high school, Kim almost seemed to be possessive of her time. I thought at times that it seemed like Kim was jealous of the time that I was spending with her. Now that we're adults, things have changed, and there isn't any hostility between us, but I wouldn't call us friends either. Kim is the godmother to our children and an important part of my wife's life, so I put up with the occasional side eye from her because I wanted my wife to be happy. I trusted that my wife always had my best interest in mind and wouldn't let Kim talk her into anything. One thing that Kim would always joke about with my wife was how I was the only man she had ever been with. She would make jokes about how my wife didn't actually know if I was good in the bedroom because I was all she ever had. She would just make little comments like that intended to get at me. Kim had never married, and she had several boyfriends over the time that I knew her. She would always tell my wife about the things that they would do together, and she was very open about her sex life. What bothered me about it was that my wife would ask a lot of questions. She seemed to be a little too invested in what was happening. I asked my wife about it one day because my insecurities about it had taken over. I asked her if she regretted only ever being with me. She told me that she didn't, and I was silly for thinking it, but it was still something in the back of my mind. About 6 months ago, I started to really notice that there was something off about my wife. She was acting distant, and that wasn't like her. She was spending more time out of the house with Kim than she was at home with the kids and me. Now she was a stay-at-home mom, and I kind of figured that she was just going a little stir-crazy. I thought that she might have just wanted to get away for a little while and have some time to herself, so I let her have that. I made sure she was doing okay. I checked in with her to see if there was anything that I could do to make her feel better, but she just told me that she was fine. One night she told me that she was going over to Kim's house and that she would be back in a few hours. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was just focused on spending time with the kids while she was away. She didn't end up coming home until around 2 in the morning. The entire time that I knew her, I had never seen her come home that late. She was always home before or around midnight, and if she was much later than that, she would let me know. When she got in, I asked her about where she was because I was worried. I had expected her to be home around 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, and she was much later than that. We got into a little bit of an argument because she thought I was being very demanding about wanting to know where she was. I tried to explain that I was just worried and I didn't care, but I was about to call the police and drive around looking for her. We ended up just going to sleep and talking about it in the morning. She apologized for getting into an argument with me, and we carried on from there. After 16 years of marriage, our sex life did take a bit of a downturn. It wasn't like it was when we were newlyweds, that's for sure. Still, we would have sex at least once a week. After a few weeks, I noticed that my wife and I hadn't been intimate with each other. I thought back, and there were a couple of times where I tried to initiate something and she turned me down. I was worried that there was something wrong with the marriage at that point. I figured that our sex life disappearing might have been a sign of something else that I wasn't seeing. I talked to my wife about it a couple of days after the thought struck me. I told her that if there was something going on, I wanted to work through it, and I was willing to do whatever it took to do that. If that meant going to marriage counseling every night of the week, I would do it. I loved her, and I didn't want to be with anybody but her. She told me that there weren't any problems, and that she just wasn't feeling like herself. A few weeks passed, and I noticed that she was getting very sketchy around her phone. She bought one of those screen protectors that blacks out the screen if you look at it from the side. She changed her passcode, and she almost never let it out of her sight. She had never been like that with her phone before. In fact, she had previously been so careless with it that she would leave it behind when she would go to the grocery store. At that point, I started to suspect that there was something on the phone that I needed to look at. One afternoon while she was taking a nap, I grabbed it to figure out what the issue was. She changed her passcode, but the fingerprints on the screen aligned with 4 numbers when I went to unlock it. As soon as I saw what they were, I knew she used our middle child's birth year as the passcode. I got in without an issue. When I looked through the phone, I found some very alarming things. The first thing I noticed was that in her photo gallery, there were a few very recent pictures of her body in tight outfits and a bikini. Alongside that, I found a few screenshots from men's Tinder profiles. Right away, I looked through the apps she had on her phone and I didn't see Tinder. I checked the App Store and it showed that she owned the app, but didn't have it downloaded. She was being very secretive about using it. I ended up downloading it again and was able to get in using her Apple ID and a text message verification. From what I gathered, she was downloading it every day and logging in to check messages, then deleting it again. In her profile, she specified that she was looking for a discreet hookup and nothing more. The pictures I'd seen of her were being used as her profile pictures. There were dozens of younger men reaching out to my wife and telling her how good she looked. She was flirting with them and had even given some of them her real phone number. I checked her text messages and I found several muted conversations with unsaved numbers where she was sexting, role-playing, and exchanging nude photos with several men. What disturbed me the most with all of this was how well my wife was hiding it. She had taken a lot of steps for her affairs to be as discreet as possible. It had been going on for months, and from the messages I could tell she had met up with at least 2 different men in person. The first one was the night that she came home around 2 a.m. and told me she was at her friend Kim's house. The following morning, the man sent a message to my wife asking her if she wanted to do it again, but she never replied. The other guy she met up with shocked me. They had been having elaborate conversations about different kinks, and my wife mentioned wanting to try bondage. According to the conversation, they met up so she could try that. They continued talking after they slept together, and it looked like they were planning to meet up again. I was heartbroken seeing all of that. I loved my wife, and I thought we were happy, but I was clearly mistaken. I didn't understand how she could do something like that to me. I continued looking through her phone, and of course, I found out that Kim encouraged her to cheat. Kim was telling her about something she had been doing with one of her boyfriends, and my wife mentioned how she didn't feel comfortable asking me about it. Kim suggested she consider opening up the marriage since my wife wasn't satisfied, but my wife said that I would never go for it. Kim basically convinced her that if I didn't open the marriage, my wife's only option was to cheat. I put the phone back, and I spent the night on the couch in the basement because I couldn't stand to be around her. I didn't know what to do. She was my world, and it had been taken from me in an instant when I found out what she had done. I hated her for what she did, and I wanted to make her pay for ruining our marriage. I thought about it all day the following day at work. Finally, I had a great idea. I told my wife that it would be fun to have a double date with Kim and her new boyfriend, so she jumped at the opportunity to schedule one. We hired a babysitter, and I made reservations at a nice restaurant downtown. When we got there, my wife was surprised to see that there were 6 place settings. She thought that there must have been a mistake with the reservation, but she didn't question it too much. We ordered our drinks, and shortly after we sat down, the others arrived. My wife's face completely dropped when the men she cheated on me with walked in. She was speechless. She had no idea what to say. The night before, I went into her phone and texted both of them, telling them to meet her at the restaurant before they hooked up again. Both of them were very eager to go. One of them asked what was going on and stood at the end of the table, very confused. I asked him if he knew that he was sleeping with a married woman. He was speechless and just looked at my wife for answers. My wife tried to tell them to leave because they had nothing to do with her actions. She had withheld a lot of the truth from them. Kim and her boyfriend saw that we were obviously having our own thing and tried to leave. I stopped them before they could and made sure the boyfriend knew that Kim was the one who recommended that my wife cheat. He was a little disturbed by that. They started arguing with each other while my wife yelled at me for embarrassing her. The men tried to apologize and explain that they didn't know. I didn't fully believe them because she was asking for a discreet hookup. Who does that if they're not cheating on someone? We had been married for 16 years. There was nothing she could have asked me for that I would have looked at her differently. If she was interested in BDSM or anything like that, I would have tried it if it would have made her happy. Everything she was saying was a load of bull. One of the staff at the restaurant came to our table and made us leave because we were causing a huge scene. My wife stormed out after people started staring at us. Her face was beet red and she looked like she was about to cry. The cherry on top of it all was that people were recording the fight. She tried to explain everything to me when we got home. She said that there were things she was always curious about, but she was too afraid to ask me about them. So she looked for other men to take care of it for her. She begged me to forgive her and promised to be more open with me in the future. I found a divorce attorney the very next day. Now my wife and I are divorced and currently going through custody hearings with our children. I want nothing to do with her at all, so it's been difficult. I ended up selling the house so I could buy the condo that I'm living in now. She's living with Kim, who is also now single because her boyfriend didn't like that she ruined our marriage. OP, her throwing away 16 years of marriage because you were curious about something in the bedroom is horrible. It definitely seems like you were the type of husband who would have listened to what she wanted and done what you could to make her happy. It's a shame that she threw that away. Kim had absolutely no business suggesting anything like that to your wife. With the way that you described her at the beginning of the story, it almost seems like she knew this would be the downfall of your marriage and she might have wanted that. After all, your wife is no longer with you and living with her now. I'm glad that Kim's boyfriend left her after what she did. Anybody who would weigh in on the issue could realize that Kim was very much in the wrong. Of course, the blame is on your wife because she was the one who actually cheated. I think her trying to blame you because of the possibility that you wouldn't be open to what she wanted in the bedroom is ridiculous. As a married couple, you should be able to talk about things like that. If she couldn't talk about it, that was on her. I'm glad that you are divorced now, and I wish you the best in the custody hearings. I know 16 years is a long time to invest in someone only to have them stab you in the back like this, but I really hope you can move forward and find someone in the future who values you. Now let's move on to our next story for today. I, 29 male, have been married to my wife, 30 female, for almost 3 years, and before everything went to hell, it was the happiest time of my life. We were together for 2 years before we got married, and I fell headfirst in love with her. All of her friends loved me when we first met. I was brought into their friend group pretty easily, and everything felt very natural. My girlfriend would talk about a friend from high school from time to time who was in the military. We'll call him Ben. She told me that they were best friends when they were in high school, and they had stayed in touch with each other over the years. I didn't get to meet him until my wedding day. My wife invited him and his wife to the wedding, not even sure if they would make it or not. He ended up cashing in a few days of his leave to attend the wedding because my wife meant so much to him. I was a little annoyed that he did that. I didn't care much about having a big wedding or making a huge statement about it being my day or anything. But when Ben walked into the venue, he kind of stole the show. Everybody from my girlfriend's side of the family was clamoring over him throughout the entire reception. It almost felt like the wedding that I paid thousands of dollars for didn't mean as much as Ben coming home for the weekend. It felt like my wife even spent the majority of our wedding reception catching up with Ben. I tried not to let it bother me. I knew that he was an old friend that she hadn't seen in a while, and that was it. She had never given me any reason to think anything differently. Ben left the following Sunday, and my wife and I went on our honeymoon. The first couple of days we were gone were fantastic. I was happier than I had ever been, and I felt like the luckiest man in the world. Then she started talking about Ben again. He texted her over some pictures that he had taken at the wedding. Most of them were selfies he'd taken of both of them together. She kept showing them to me and talking about how happy she was to have seen him at the wedding. After, she started telling me about all the crazy stories Ben told her while they spent all that time catching up. I was annoyed, so I ended up leaving after a while to try and forget about it by spending some time at the pool. I don't even think she noticed that I was annoyed. After about an hour, I went back upstairs to our hotel room, and my wife was naked in front of the mirror. I asked her what she was doing, and she just told me that she was changing into a swimsuit to meet me outside. After that incident during a honeymoon, everything else went smoothly. We got back home and into the rhythm of our daily married life pretty quickly. I knew that my wife was talking to Ben a lot more after we returned. When I asked her about what they talked about, she said they had friendly conversations about nothing at all. Again, I didn't have much reason not to trust her, so I believed it. I'm not going to lie, I was a little bit jealous of the attention she was giving him, but she married me and not him. I tried not to let it bother me. A couple of years pass, and I've gotten used to hearing about Ben once or twice a week in my life. They would text each other and tag each other in memes on Facebook and things like that. As far as I was aware, they never really talked on the phone or video chatted, so it all seemed entirely platonic. I guess an important thing to note as well is that Ben was married. He married his high school sweetheart right out of college before he went into the service. I knew that my wife didn't like her at all because she was a bit of a mean girl in high school. One day my wife and I were both home and hanging out around the house when someone knocked on our door. Neither of us was expecting anyone. We thought that if anything it was probably some canvassers trying to sign us up for voter registrations or something. I opened the door and I saw Ben standing there. My wife was on the couch behind me, looking over my shoulder to see who was there. When she saw Ben, she leaped out of her seat and ran to hug him. He grabbed her in his arms and picked her up while she wrapped her legs around him. I wasn't okay with the hug. Maybe it was me being a little bit petty, but it didn't seem like the type of hug someone would give a friend that they described as being like a brother to them. Ben's wife was right behind him, and she looked as uncomfortable with it as I did. Nevertheless, we invited them both in, and we made them some coffee so we could catch up. Ben had apparently just returned home the night before, and the first person he wanted to see after his wife was my wife. My wife was all over him in some ways. Obviously, she wasn't sitting on his lap and kissing him, but she was very interested in everything he had to say. She kept squeezing his hand when he would say something, and I noticed that it was lingering a little bit too long. We said goodbye to Ben and his wife after about an hour. After they drove off, I asked my wife about what had just happened with Ben. She didn't understand what I meant right away, but I told her that she was fawning over him while he was there, which made me uncomfortable. She told me that I was wrong for feeling that way because Ben had just gotten back from the military where he could have died. She was just glad to see that he was alive and well. I told her that some of the things she did seemed a little conspicuous and I didn't like it. She got very mad at me for suggesting anything could have been going on, and she stormed out. I tried to get her to come back and talk about it like adults, but she just ignored me and left. I had no idea where she went. After a few hours, I was worried about her when she didn't come home. I expected her to drive around the block a couple of times, maybe take a walk through Target, or go and get a coffee then come back. I tried calling her, but she didn't answer. I called a few of her girlfriends, the ones that I figured she would probably go to if she needed to rant about me for a while, and none of them had seen her. I called her mom and her sister, and neither of them had heard from her either. The only other person I could think to contact was Ben, and I didn't have any of his information. All I could do was wait to talk to her whenever she came home. She didn't come home until about 9 a.m. the following morning. She looked like she was hungover, and before she said anything to me, she hopped in the shower. I asked her about where she was, and she didn't want to tell me right away. I had a strong suspicion she was at Ben's house because she wasn't anywhere else that I called. While she was in the shower, I was in the bathroom with her leaning against the counter trying to tell her about how sorry I was. I hated being in arguments with her, and I didn't want her to walk out again like she did the night before. While I was there, a text message from Ben came through on her phone. My curiosity got the better of me, so I unlocked her phone to read the message. In the message, Ben was telling my wife to lie to me about where she was the night before. He wanted her to tell me that they went to a local bar together and went back to his house where she passed out on the couch. He said that he didn't want his wife to know the truth, so they had to be careful. He didn't say what the truth was though. The further I scrolled back, I saw several exchanges of nude pictures and sexually explicit messages between them. It wasn't a far leap for me to assume they slept together. I kept scrolling through the messages, and I saw that their virtual affair had been going on for a very long time. It was happening before we even met. It seemed like they had hooked up a few times when Ben had been home on leave, and when he was away, they would send each other pictures and sext. After my wife and I got married, things slowed down and they both acknowledged it was wrong, but they continued from time to time. After he showed up to the wedding, my wife messaged him and told him how irresistible he was to her. There were talks during our honeymoon where he mentioned wanting to divorce his wife to be with her, and my wife mentioned how she wished he'd have said something sooner. And when I saw her naked in front of the mirror, it was a picture that she was taking of herself to send him. On our honeymoon, I was so furious. I had been right to be suspicious of Ben, and she made it seem like I was some monster who was trying to control her every move. She pointed the blame at me as if she wasn't the one having an affair with a married man. My wife had lied to me and betrayed me throughout the entirety of our relationship, and I felt like my world was turned upside down. I put her phone down after sending myself some screenshots of the messages, and I went to my office to try and figure out what I wanted to do. Divorce was the only way forward for me, but I wanted to do a little something else before. When my wife got out of the shower, she told me that the following day Ben's wife was throwing together a little welcome home party for him. I thought it was the perfect time to let everybody know how much of a liar and cheater their hero was. I played it cool until the party, not letting my wife suspect that I knew anything. When the time came, my wife got all dressed up, more than she ever had for me, I might add. We went to Ben's house where the party was. About an hour into the party, the house was packed. Dozens of people showed up to thank Ben for his service to our country. When I figured the room was full enough, I airdropped about 10 screenshots of the conversations I'd taken from my wife's phone. I listened to phones chiming in the room as they all got the airdrop notification. Some people turned and looked at me as if they were questioning what I was airdropping them. A lot of people opened it, and the attention quickly turned from Ben being a hero to being a cheater. Ben's wife got the airdrop as well, and she walked up to him and slapped him in the face before rushing away in tears. The party was almost silent when everyone realized that Ben and my wife knew what happened. They were all waiting for some explosion. My wife walked up to me and quietly asked me why I would do that to her. I asked her about why she would do that to me. Then I told her that she could expect to be getting divorce papers any day. So many of her friends and the people in town were there and got the messages. On top of that, they were being shared with a lot of other people. Practically half the town knew about the affair by the end of the day. My wife wasn't going to be able to go anywhere without getting stares from people. I was back home packing my bags, and she confronted me, once again treating me like I was the bad guy for finding out that she cheated on me. I wasn't going to have it, so I just packed my bags and ignored her as I walked out. We're divorced now. Thankfully, everything was so new in the marriage that we hadn't bought a house or anything like that. It was easy for us to separate from each other. Ben and his wife got divorced, and his wife ended up taking the house and most of their assets. From what I can tell through town rumors, Ben and my ex-wife tried dating for a while after everything happened. Things didn't really seem to work out with them because they broke up after a few months. I guess they just liked the idea of being together more than actually doing it. OP, learning that your partner cheated on you is already awful, but learning that it was happening throughout the entirety of your relationship is horrible. The fact that she and Ben were talking about possible divorce during your honeymoon is wild. I have to wonder why they wouldn't just try to officially be with each other to begin with. If Ben was so keen on being with your wife, even before you knew her, why wouldn't he divorce his wife to be with her? It could have saved people a lot of heartbreak if they had just done things the right way, but they were selfish and didn't care about hurting their partners. I definitely think it's karma that your now ex-wife is going to be seen as a bit of a pariah in town. What she did was wrong, and she definitely deserves the negative attention from the people in town. I'm also glad that she and Ben didn't last long. They didn't deserve a happy ending together after the pain that they caused. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.